name is Elakeisha O'Kelly, Esquire, aka the Empowerment Influencer. I'm coming here to empower you on a very important topic, the Corporate Transparency Act. There's a lot of information that's floating out there, a lot of useful information, a lot of incomplete information, and probably a lot of misinformation. But I'm going to empower you in a 4-part video that if you listen to each video in its bite-sized chunks, you will have a full understanding of what the Corporate Transparency Act is. Does it apply to you? And if it does apply to you, what are you required to do? And if you don't do what you're required to do, what will actually happen? So we're going to start off with the Corporate Transparency Act by first talking about what it is. What is the Corporate Transparency Act? So a lot of times you just hear the Corporate Transparency Act law was passed and this is what's required to do. So let's just stop and start off with part 1. Let's understand what the Corporate Transparency Act is. In 2021, Congress enacted the Corporate Transparency Act. That means that they passed legislation, they passed law to have the Corporate Transparency Act put into play. And this law created a requirement that beneficial ownership information needs to be reported. And I'll explain what beneficial ownership information is later on. But it's established a requirement of reporting beneficial ownership information. And the reason why they did this, well, it said the reason why they did this is it's a response from the U.S. government's continual effort or initiative, I should say, to make it harder for money laundering, terrorism, and other misconducts that can be done by bad actors to hide these transactions in what they call shell companies. And it's believed that the anonymous shell companies, meaning that you have these companies, you have these entities formed, and on paper with the Secretary of State, it makes it seem like, these companies are actually operating in business, but they're not. They're actually businesses formed in order for bad acts to be completed. Well, that's what the U.S. government feels, and they feel that actors can hide their transactions behind these shell companies. And those are the type of companies that are the vehicle of choice of terrorists, criminals, and launderers. Like, that's their vehicle of choice, is to do it move their acts through an entity. So they hope that by passing this law, it will prevent these wrongdoers from exploiting U.S. companies, exploiting the companies for the criminal gain, and to assist the law enforcement agencies in detecting, preventing, and punishing said acts. So that's what it is. It is law that was passed and established for the reasons that I stated, to, again, prevent, detect, and punish bad actors or wrongdoers using business entities to shield or hide their bad acts. The reporting requirements are very strict, and it's an obligation that's put on these small business owners. Again, you may have heard a lot of individuals reference the Corporate Transparency Act and only mention LLCs. We're going to talk more about it, but the Corporate Transparency Act applies to all business entities that are formed, U.S. business entities that are formed with the Secretary of State or similar offices, approving offices. And it could be foreign companies that come to the U.S. to do business, or they register. There's a trail there, but we're going to talk about who actually has to report. But there's strict obligations for these small businesses to collect their information and share their information of beneficial owners and company applicants. So that's another thing you probably just heard. So one, when you hear about Corporate Transparency Act, a lot of individuals are only referencing LLCs. It applies to all of the business entities. This applies to corporations as well. And the second thing you probably heard is that beneficial owners' information have to be submitted, but also company applicants for certain businesses that were established a certain time is going to be company applicants as well. Again, we'll talk more about that. So know that there's a strict reporting requirement. The reporting requirement is going to be for businesses to share information about their beneficial owners and company applicant. This information will need to be filed with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. That's FinCEN. That's what it stands for. So when you hear individuals say you have to report your information to FinCEN, instead of just going by the abbreviation, know that FinCEN stands for Financial Crime Enforcement Network. So this information needs to be shared on FinCEN, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Treasury. And with these strict obligations and this reporting of beneficial owners and company applicants, there is going to be punishment, very costly punishment for any person who willfully provides fraudulent information or who willfully neglects to keep their information up to date. So that is a very important thing to understand, that you will be penalized. And again, we'll talk more about that. And according to the law that was passed, because there is some concern about, wow, they want to just collect our information. A lot of people feel a certain way about that, right? We're talking about the government and they're collecting your information. Their claims is that, especially according to the law, not just their claims, that this information will not be publicly available, and the information can be released to federal law enforcement and agencies and other enforcement agencies through a court order. Or it can be released to financial institutions with the permission of the reporting company. So that is what the Corporate Transparency Act is. That is how it was established, and the why it was established and what's going to be required. So the next video, I'm going to just break down and we're going to define some terms so we can have a full conversation about the Corporate Transparency Act.